Hello, I'm Maria Jones. Thank you for watching. Today on One of Nine, we've come to the Netherlands. And thank you, Rebecca, for having us.
Thank you for coming.
And hosting us for the day. Rebecca was not a Catholic to start with, yet she's one of those families that just think they've been a Catholic forever. So Rebecca, you were brought up...
I was Methodist, so we were actually E10 From Methodist, which is one of the sort of the more, shall I say, serious Methodists. So completely the opposite to anything Catholic related. So you walk into a chapel and it's just white walls. There's a pulpit, there's maybe an organ, and that's it. There's no saints, there's no painting, anything like that. And it was just scripture and singing. That was, my whole family were Methodist. That was all I knew. My grandparents were Methodist, my great-grandparents were Methodist, the whole family, cousins, everything like that. So I didn't know any different, really.
Did you have any ideas about the Catholic Church back then?
The only thing I knew, watching films. So when you see like the really romanticised Catholics, like they go to confession and you see them in the confessional, that was it. And the only other thing was when we'd been on holiday and we visited churches. So we used to go to France quite a lot, and we'd go and visit like cathedrals and churches. That was it. But it was nothing. I didn't know anything deeper than here is a building. It's got some nice paintings in it.
So what was your first experience of the Catholic faith?
I met James. So he was Catholic when we met, and he was very much, you should come to church with me. And then I think it was the first Christmas after we started dating. So my first mass was a Christmas mass with him and his family. No pressure at all, just going to your first mass with the family, not knowing anything, not knowing anybody. But it was really nice and it was really welcoming. But that was, yeah, the first one.
How did your family feel that you went to the Catholic Mass?
My family were very staunch Methodist when I was growing up. And then they are still Methodist, but they've moved sort of away. They don't go to chapel as often, just for health reasons and things like that, they've not been able to get. So by the time I was a teenager, I was discovering my faith more. And a lot of my friends were Methodist then, because you start thinking, actually, what do I want to do with my life? Where do I want to go? So my family were okay with it because I had been searching for things. A couple of my friends, like the Methodist friends, were a bit more wary of what I was doing. But I'd say the only family member was my mum, was the only one who was not quite completely anti-Catholic, but she was very distrustful of Catholics. I think, like me, she didn't know about the Catholic faith in terms of the deeper doctrine. She had once again seen films, things that people had said, hearsay from like older generations of her family about women being marginalised. Or you were there, you have big families and babies, you don't go out to work. My mum was very much you will go to university, you will get a job, you will work and have babies, you have your own life and you have a family life. But to her, if I was becoming Catholic, it would mean that I didn't have my own life.
And was that convincing for you as well? You did think, okay, yeah, I want to do my own thing.
Well, yeah, like I said, that was my generation of school. There was this whole way of saying to women, you must now go out to work, you must now go, and everybody was going to go to university. You were all going to get jobs and you were going to have 2 children. and that was going to be life, and then children would grow up and you'd have grandkids, but you'd also have your career. And everybody I went to school with, all the girls I went to school with, that was how it was going to be, and we'd all been sold this line. And I never really thought about it as a teenager, and I thought, yeah, I only really want like 2 kids. That went a bit differently. It wasn't until I met James and I started thinking, where do I want to go and what do I want to do? And
Where did you meet James?
We met at the Good Friday Walk of Witness in our local town centre, which is an ecumenical thing on a Good Friday, obviously. And all the local churches, there's a central point in the town centre, and each church will carry a cross, and they walk from the church to the meeting point in the town centre, and there's normally a big cross in the town centre.
So you'd gone as a Methodist and he's gone as a Catholic?
Yeah. So I went to buy some Easter eggs, actually. So pestered my dad to drive me into town. He dropped me off on like the edge of town, and I walked into town, and I thought, oh, what's this? Because I'd never been before, didn't know it. And a gentleman was standing there, and he offered me a hymn book, and it turns out it was James's dad. So I shared a hymn book with James's dad, and then James this young man sort of sidled up and said hello and shared the hymn book on the other side, and that was James. So then I excused myself. We'd said a couple of prayers, and I excused myself, went into my shopping, came back, and they were all still there. Once again, I thought, well, I'll join in, sort of edged up to the back of the group, and this young man who I'd seen earlier shared his hymn book with me. Didn't really pay any attention, because I wasn't there for anything other than Easter eggs. So I walked off to go to the bus stop, and as I was walking off, I heard someone sort of calling. I turned around, and it was James, and he ran after me to ask me for my phone number.
And did you give it to him? No.
I refused. And I thought, oh, he's like a youth worker asking for my phone number, because he asked me if I wanted to go for a cup of tea. I sort of said, well, no, but I'll take yours, because I don't want to give you my
his number.
So I took his number, went and got my bus, and then Easter Sunday, I just messaged him and said, happy Easter, and it kind of went from there.
So you started dating when you were 16. How old were you when you got married?
21.
So 5 years later. So within that 5 years, did you convert within that time?
We'd obviously had quite a few chat, and James had said to me, I mean, he was at the point where he was wanting to settle down, he was looking for going further in life because he's a little bit older. And he'd said from the start, I want a family, I'm looking for a serious sort of relationship, but I can only do that with a Catholic. The family's going to be Catholic, the children are going to be Catholic. I can't see myself marrying anyone but a Catholic.
Wow.
Yeah, quite a heavy chat, that one, which for me was quite tough, because I wasn't thinking that way at the time. I wasn't thinking about my future. I was going to finish school, I was going to go to university. That was as far as I had got in my life plan.
And maybe you didn't have it in your heart at that point to convert, so
and it's something
because somebody else wanted you to.
Yeah, and I pushed against it quite hard, because once again, someone's telling me what to do. And as a teen, we all do that as a teenager. If someone tells you something, you do the exact opposite. So I was coming to go off to university, and James said to me, well, tell you what, will you do something for me? If I give you something to read, will you read it for me? And I was going on holiday with my parents, and I was just like, yeah, okay, fine. Give me something to read, and I'll do it. And he gave me the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the full big one, the main one. So I dutifully took it and I read it. So across the 2 weeks, I sat and I read the entire catechism. Didn't understand half of it, but I read it and came back, and we had another chat, and all these things he'd been saying started making sense. Like the body and the blood, because Methodists don't believe in the real body, like communion.
The true presence.
The true presence. So we used to have communion once a month. So they took a loaf of bread and they cut it up into squares on a plate, and they had a little bit of grape juice in little tiny like shot glasses, and everyone had a square and everyone had a shot glass.
Symbolic of the Last Supper.
Yeah, the whole idea of the real presence just blew my mind. It was this amazingly weird thing at the time. So, but then reading the catechism and looking back into it and why that was there and the reasons behind it and why the Mass is the way it is and why the belief is the way it is, it started to click. We'd been to church with him, there'd been hymns, but there was like 1 or 2 hymns, whereas our church, if it was musical, there was a hymn and a reading and a hymn and a reading and a hymn and a reading. So music was a big part, and I found that slightly odd that there was no music. And then scripturally, the fact that you had set readings each year. So this is your reading for the year, and there's 3 years worth, and then you go back to the beginning and you start again.
With the Catholic.
Whereas, yeah, at chapel, the minister had, depending which chapel you went to, you might have set readings, or the minister would say, I want to speak about this today, so we are going to have these readings, and the readings would all match up with what the minister wanted to say. So it was just very formalised. It wasn't spontaneous, whereas the Methodists were very spontaneous in a way. Yeah, it was just trying to get used to the fact that there is a reason for things. You can't just go off and do your own thing. There are no female ministers, so no female priests, because anyone can preach in a Methodist chapel. Having the same priest every week was another, it's the same person, it's the same. The homilies are following on from each other, doing a series rather than that. So
was this something that was attractive to you at the time? Do you think, I'm seeing the value of this? Or was it just kind of an odd, different thing?
I like order. I like things to be regimented. And especially during my teenage years, I liked things to be just in a way. So I was drawn to that. There's also the other thing we don't have in the Methodist chapel is confession. No confession. I still find that even like 15 years down the line, confession is a strange thing for me. People say they struggle with it anyway, but I do struggle with it now. Just because I went through my whole childhood and my whole teenage years, you just did what you wanted. And
And when you say you do what you wanted, as in like sin doesn't have a consequence?
Yeah, there was we had heaven and hell. So that was a very much a big thing, is we had like the hell and damnation ministers who would come and they'd just preach, everybody's going to hell if you do this and kind of thing. But there was no purgatory. Purgatory was not a thing. You either, if you're good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell. And if you're kind of in the middle, you go to heaven, sort of thing. Unless you've done something pretty sinful, you're going to heaven. We're all going to see Jesus. I think so. The idea of going to confession and asking for forgiveness wasn't there. I mean, you could say your prayers and you could say, I'm sorry, I've done something wrong. But it wasn't like, actually, you know what, I've got this in my heart, I've got this in my body, I need to be pure to go forward to meet Jesus because he needs me to be pure, or I need to be pure to meet him. That wasn't there. When I did get confirmed, and obviously I made my first confession, it was a really big thing, because you go, actually, I do feel different now. I had like 18 years worth of sin to confess, but then the priest is so good.
And was he the one that was mentoring you along?
Yeah, but it was a big weight off the shoulders. And then you do start living differently, because you think, well, if I do that, I'm going to have to go to confession again.
I'm going to say that out loud. Back to the conversion. How did you finally take the leap?
I went to university, and like I said, because my mum was dead set against anything Catholic. I mean, she knew James at that point. We'd been dating for a couple of years. She knew his family. They were all Catholic, and she'd sort of accepted that I was in this relationship with a Catholic. I said, James, if I'm going to do this, I don't want my mum to think you've pushed me into it. I had told him I was going to look, but I hadn't really expressed to him what I was going to do. So in Freshers' Fair, I went off to university. First day, I went to Freshers' Fair and I went and found the Catholic Society. A lovely group of people who I made some fantastic friends with them. And I said, look, I'm thinking about becoming Catholic. Would you be all right if I came along to Mass with you and join the society? And maybe if there's a priest available, could I speak to him? And there was the Dominicans, so the chaplaincy was run by the Dominicans up in Leicester. So they got me in touch with Father Tony. And he said, yeah, we'll meet up, we'll come along. And we met each week to discuss things. And I did that for my first year.
It's lovely to hear that you had a priest for that year. I've heard in a few conversion stories now, people had found a priest, either sought one out or one sort of became available to them that they could just ask questions to, and it sounds like that was, maybe it was foundational in your conversion, would you say?
Yeah, and he was completely different to anyone I'd met before in terms of priests. Obviously, I'd met James's family, I'd been to Mass with James a couple of times, but the priest was very standoffish kind of thing because I didn't know them. He lived in Leicester, but then once a week he'd go down to London on the train to go to a musical. So he'd come back every week and go, oh, I went to see this opera this week. Oh, I went to do this musical this week. They're not this like standoffish sort of authority figure, which having grown up, the minister was always like an authority because they stood up and they preached and there was like this tone about them. And then suddenly there were these men who were, yes, they were priests and they were there to minister to us, but they were also human. They were men in their own right.
And had you told your family along this
I hadn't mentioned anything to my family, purely because I want to do it. Obviously, I told James, but hadn't really said to James that I was doing. I just said to him, I've joined the society, I'm going to Mass with them. And I sort of sat my parents down and said, well, actually, just so you know, I'm getting confirmed. So you can see my mum sort of going, oh, and I was like, well, actually, Catholic. And she took it not particularly well at the time, but she came around. And she came to the confirmation. My entire family came, James's family came. And actually, I had a very good friend through the Catholic Society who lived in Halls with me. And obviously, I'd made friends in Halls. And I hadn't told anyone else in Halls that I was doing it. And they all turned up. And she'd gone to Halls and said, look, this is a big thing for Becky. I think it'd be nice to support her. So I had this little like cheerleading group sat in the corner.
So Rebecca, you've now got a gorgeous bunch of children. 6?
Thank you.
Just had your 6?
Just had them 6.
Very neat. 3 boys, 3 girls.
Yeah.
As in 3 boys, then 3 girls.
3 boys, 3 girls. Matthias, Cyprian and Gabriel are the 3 boys. And then we've got Thea and Hermione and Tabitha are the 3 girls.
Gorgeous names. You're one of how many children?
I'm one of 2, so it's just me and my sister.
Yeah.
And same with James. James is just him and his sister. So no, I didn't think I was going to have a big family. James had always said he wanted a big family. And a lot of his friends had big families and had big families. We got married and obviously we discussed it before getting married. Mm-hmm. I was like, actually, yeah, I don't mind. I'd quite happily have more.
Audrey here. Audrey, can you play here?
And I will admit, I'm not what you would call a baby person. I don't do babies. I never have done babies. Yeah, never.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sister. Sorry. I can see the kiss.
Were you trying to give a kiss?
And you probably not had too many around as well.
No, and my sister had her first one just before I went to university. But even then, it was babies. No, toddlers. Yeah, older kids. Yeah, but babies were just I don't know. And even now, I'm not what you call a natural baby person. But James would just go gooey-eyed over any baby, any time.
And so then, was it straightforward? Were there any waiting?
Matthias was number 1. Mm-hmm. and we found out I was pregnant the year of our first, so it's the week of our first anniversary. We found out I was pregnant, which was lovely. And I did actually then, I was just like, actually, I'm pregnant. I'm really happy I'm pregnant, because I'd started to think, can we? Because it's like we've been married a year, we've not had any signs of anything yet, and I do actually really want a baby. I really do want a baby now. Got pregnant.
Isn't that sweet? Maybe do you wonder, is that God's little way that your heart sort of grew to want it more?
It was odd because I'd never wanted a baby, and I sort of said to James, I'd quite like to get married, have a bit of time together, like newlyweds, and then maybe think about have a family. And we'd go into church, and as we got further and further on into that year of marriage, and I started going to the Lady Chapel and praying, which I'd never done before. I was like, I do. I really, in my heart, I'm desperate for a baby now, which was a complete change to everything I'd ever felt. And then found out I was pregnant, like I say, the first anniversary. And my pregnancy was really easy, really smooth, no problem. Went slightly overdue, so I was 2 weeks overdue. Went in, started labour normally, and then there were some slight complications, and they said there was meconium.
So just to clarify, the meconium is when the baby can be a little bit distressed in the...
Yeah, and they poo before they're born, so they poo inside you. So when they come
and then
out
they can
and start
ingest
breathing,
some.
they ingest it and inhale it. So some babies can have it and be absolutely fine, some babies can become an infection. Then it turned out I got strep B as well, which is once again another infection, which is a natural bacteria which occurs in like a high percentage of the population, which is absolutely normal, but then in babies when they're born, if the baby picks it up, it can make them poorly. So they had to induce, and he was born and he was this perfect little bundle. But I think one of the complications we had is they'd given me some medication, and it just made me very sleepy and him very sleepy. So when he was born, neither of us were particularly awake, shall we say. So that first initial bonding moment where they give you the baby, and we were both like out of it completely. So then I took him home, and he was just, we were discharged, everything was fine, yes, everything's fine, he's okay. And he was about 3 days old, and he was really distressed. And he wasn't feeding properly, and I was trying to breastfeed, and he wouldn't settle, and he was just crying. So we rang the midwives up.
I bet lots of mums are remembering those early days.
And that's the thing, they
first
say,
having a baby.
They say the baby's really unsettled and not to worry. So I rang them up and I said, look, I don't want to be like this neurotic first time mum, but there's something not quite right going on. Can you come and check? So they sent like one of the community support ladies out, and she said, well, yeah, I think there's a couple of signs that he's a bit dehydrated. Let's go in, take him in to go and get checked. James and I put him in the car seat, and she actually went with us to the neonatal unit, and he got an infection. So they said, we think he might have meningitis. We don't know.
Oh, wow.
We're going to have to do lumbar punctures and all that kind of stuff. So he was poorly. He wasn't like the poorly baby, because obviously you go to the neonatal and there's really poorly babies.
Yeah.
And he was quite big. So he was 9 pounds. So compared to all
He wasn't like those 2 pounders.
No. So you see the other neonatal units, and he's like. So he was in for a week, and he had an infection. And of course we said, well, where's he had this infection from? Like, what's going on? And they said, and I just, one of those really flippant things that people just say, and like the doctors, they don't realise, but when you're a new mum and you're hormonal and you've not slept and you're just feeling really down.
And day 3 to day 5 is tearful days.
Yeah, and James said, well, where's he got this infection from? And this doctor said, oh, just got it from mum. Mum's given it to him. Because obviously it was just one of those things they can get, when they're being born, they can pick up infections. The doctor saying he's got it from mum broke my world. I just went into, I've killed my baby. And that's where I stayed for the next 6 months. And that led to the postnatal depression, which we didn't seek help for, because I didn't vocalise it. I didn't say, I've got this depression. But I remember once I rang my mum up, and I was just in tears for him. I was like, I've got this baby. I don't know what to do. I can't do anything with him. I don't know how to look after him. He's 8 weeks old. He's not even had a bath. And my mum didn't know what to do, and James didn't know what to do. James was trying to look after me. He was trying to work. He was trying to look after baby. And it was tough. And then I couldn't breastfeed. And it was because I've been trying to breastfeed, and he was getting distressed. and they said they think he'd got almost like post-traumatic stress in a way. He'd associated being on the breast with being distressed, so he wouldn't do skin to skin with me. So the minute I put him, like you can see a tablet, if I put him in this position, he would scream. And we tried all sorts of breastfeeding techniques and nothing would work, and he wouldn't feed. So we were bottle feeding him, but like I said, he wouldn't be cuddled by me. He would be cuddled by James, but he would not be cuddled by me. And that hurt a lot. So I managed it by pumping.
In practical mode.
I can keep him alive by giving him my milk. That's what I can give him. So if I was not feeding him with the bottle, I was on a pump. And it was just like, I mean, and you know how often babies feed when they're little. And he was a milk guzzler. Once he started taking it, he was drinking. So for 6 months, he had my milk exclusively.
Wow.
And that was tough. And it nearly broke me. It nearly broke James because I was just so tired, because like, in the middle of the night I was pumping through the night and then still trying to do everything during the day.
And there's that thing, like when you become a mum, you know, like you were saying, James is trying to do everything, and you see that he's trying to go out to work, and I've just got to look after this baby. What's so complicated? And you can really beat yourself up about it.
And he was a smiley baby. He was lovely. But those first initial months of, I've done everything. I thought I'd got it right. Thought I knew what I was doing, and I've prayed for this baby, and I wanted this baby, and he doesn't want me. That was that initial thing of, A, I almost killed him, and then B, he doesn't want me. And it's a ridiculous way to think, because he's a baby. He can't think like that. But you go down that path of your brain does weird things, and everyone would say, "Oh, you're right," and like the health visitor would come and be like, "Yeah, I'm fine. Everything's fine. Oh, he's been a bit distressed this week, but I'm fine. Everything's fine."
And would the midwives ask those questions? So I know they at least do now at the health visitors. And how are you feeling? Are you having feelings of sadness, and are you having any down feelings?
It wasn't prevalent as it was now. Now they have those set questions that they ask you. I couldn't vocalise it because like I said, I felt bad that I had brought this upon him and upon James, and and it was just like I said, just that little line from that doctor just goes round and round and round your brain, and you can't get rid of it. And you're so low that it just takes you lower and lower and lower. And I did housework, so the house was spotless. And Matthias would be like 8 months old playing with toys, and he'd have a nap, and I had to tidy all the toys away. Have a spotless house. And then like an hour later, he would wake up and play with the toys again, and then I'd have to tidy it away.
So being able to control something was
maybe...
Yeah,
so I could control the pumping, and I could control the toys, and I could control the housework. So if I couldn't control his health and I couldn't control his feelings, I could that. My birthday weekend, and he had never been away from me. I'd never let anybody have him for more than an hour. So grandma would come over and take him for a walk around the village, but no one had babysat him. He'd never been away from me. And James took me away for a weekend. So we went to a B&B, and we went just down the road, but he was like, you need to get away, you need to do something. So that was the first time I'd been away from him.
And good that your husband saw that. It's
yeah.
Good that James saw that. And maybe that wasn't so hard for you to hear at the time. Were you happy about going away, or you thought maybe,
I panicked. I had a real panic, but I was just like, you know what, it's my birthday, and he sprung it on me. It wasn't like he told me we're going away. It was oh, by the way, we're going out for dinner tonight, and while we go out for dinner, we're just going to stop off at this place, which turned out to be the B&B, and he'd packed a bag. So it was an enforced night away, but it worked.
Do you think he was in communication with your mum at all about, I'm a bit worried about Rebecca?
Definitely, he was. And my mum's spoken to me about it now. And she said she'd had a phone call from James, and she said he was on the phone. He didn't know who to care for first, because I was in one room crying and Matthias was in another room crying, and he's just like standing in the middle, which room do I go to? But the other thing James did is, because with the pumping, he said to me, you need to stop pumping. Took me to Tesco's, which is just down the road, because I was like, we're not doing formula. We're not doing formula. People don't do formula, because the government were also doing the breastfeeding kick. So it's when all this new breastfeeding stuff came out, so you must breastfeed, was like the advice from the government.
Breast is best.
Breast is best.
Yeah.
So they'd gone completely from bottle over to breast. So I was just like, what am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong here? And he said, took me to the formula aisle. I was like, this would not be here if people didn't need it and use it. It is here. You're not the only one doing this. Please just let me feed him some bottles. Let's give him some formula. Let's get some life back.
You can completely lose perspective as well. That those, just being a mum for the first time, it is mind-blowing. And I can't put it all into words, but just like what you're saying, how much you put on yourself. And with my first, with Lani, I had to stop at 3.5 weeks. That half week was even like such a big thing. You know, I couldn't even say it was less than that, because every day I wanted to feed her. And then when I had to, you know, come to terms that I couldn't. I was at uni, I'd gone back at week 3, Mum had started bringing her in on my breaks, and then you kind of just need someone, and you don't even really believe it or want to go with it at the time, but to say, it's not possible, and it's okay. Yeah. Other babies are bottle fed, and look, at the bigger picture, they're going to come out the other side, but it's so hard to see that at the time, and I was distraught.
That was James, and James did it, and it was almost like a metaphorical slap on the face. It was just like, wake up. I need you back as my wife and Becky that I knew before all this happened.
What were the signs that do you think maybe even someone else who might be watching, or might have a wife or a friend, or it might be themselves that have these feelings of postnatal depression? Because it's so common. It's so much more common than.
And they always say like the initial stage when you first have the baby and you have the hormones coming in, so you'll cry, and but even when you cry, like having done it now with the others. But there's still that happiness behind it. So you're like watching an advert and you start bawling. You're like, I don't know why I'm crying at this advert. But you can joke about it. You can be happy about it. And then you stop and you think, actually, that was quite a cathartic cry. I've released it. Whereas there was no release. I was crying and I was stopping, but I then didn't bounce back. There was the joy of having the baby, and I kind of tried to make myself joyful. But you kind of just rode the wave. There was nothing. James was happy, and I was happy because James was happy. I wasn't happy for myself.
Do you then seek any help at that point?
You can't vocalise it. You don't want to be, I think for me, you don't want to be that person who is that depressive mum, that mum who doesn't want to go out anywhere. So I had some friends who went to mums and tot groups, and I wouldn't go to start with. I stayed at home. We went for a walk around the village. But I didn't take him to any groups because I didn't feel like I could do that with him. And one of my friends came along and said, you know what, how about you come to this mums and tots group with us? And it was almost like she held my hand kind of thing. She's like, you're coming with me. I'm going to come and pick you up. And she pestered me until I actually came. And that was a big release, because then I met other mums of babies the same age. And there were other mums who had had the same thoughts and same feelings. And I say it only because James was really, really harsh with me. Yeah. I know they say, oh, you should like go softly and treat people carefully, and there was a whole thing, people didn't talk about it. But James was really, really harsh with me. He's like, look, you need to just stop, and you need to think about everything, about our relationship, about your relationship with Matthias, and about where you are within yourself now. And it wasn't until he did that I realised how far I had gone from the person I had been, and he pulled me back. And I am very careful now, because with the other children, I am very careful now with my mental health. That the minute I can see, I discuss it with the midwives now, so I am open and honest with them. I said, look, it's never been diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure I had it. and the health is as well. It's like the minute that I see myself going down that route again, I stop and I speak to James and I speak to them. The minute you vocalise it and you say, this is where I am, this is where I'm at, this is where I think I'm going, somebody else can help you. If you don't vocalise it, they don't know. And even if you think I'm being really silly, just like it's just a hormonal thing, or I don't want to bother anybody, you're not bothering anybody. They care about you.
And it doesn't only have an impact on you, but your marriage, your child.
Yes. It had an effect on James's mental health because he didn't know what to do for me.
And everyone might be asking themselves, is it me?
Yeah. Yeah, and you need to go, you don't need to ask for help. You don't need to say, I have this, I need help. But if you say, you know what, I'm not feeling right, I don't quite feel right, or I've just got this little niggle in my head, and just maybe if I spoke to you about it, could you just tell me if I'm just being silly? So then those little conversations that make a big difference. And they do make a big difference.
Your first baby, what a roller coaster.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. So then Cyprian, number two.
Number two.
Straightforward.